people ask me, when I tell them this part of my journey, do you regret not going to these Ivy League institutions? And I say, no, right? I think you get to where you're going to be. Case in point, I mentioned my cohort of doctoral students that we went in together. A couple of them were at the Ivy League institutions, right? As master's students that I mentioned before. And we all ended up in the same doctoral program, right? So that to me was even more validation of me making the right journey and me making that right choice about getting to where I needed to be and what the future held in that particular way.
Welcome to Career Cheat Code. In this podcast, you'll hear how everyday people impact the world through their careers. Learn about their journey, career hacks, and obstacles along the way. Whether you're already having the impact you want or are searching for it, this is the podcast for you.
All right. Dr. Guzman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time to join the Career Cheat Code podcast. Let's dive right in. Let's tell the world what it is you do for a living.
So I do a couple things. So first, in my day job, I'm a program officer with the Pritzker Children's Initiative. We are a program of the Pritzker Family Foundation based in Chicago. And our work centers on the earliest years. So we focus on prenatal to 3, and we help provide resources and supports for NGOs and also state governments to help improve services for infants, toddlers, and also their families. At the foundation, I'm a program officer. And so what that means is I help manage different relationships with our grantees. And that means writing recommendations for funding. That means finding new groups to fund. That means monitoring their reporting. That also means internally focusing on measuring their success and what does that look like? How are we ensuring that the work that they're doing is aligned with our strategic plan, but also in creating the impact that we hope to see in states and also nationally. In addition to that, I'm responsible for a couple of additional pieces here at the foundation. I'm our lead for measurement. So I spend a lot of time thinking about not only my grantees, but everyone's on the team and how are those tracking towards our larger goals. I'm also have started up recently a new strategy focused on nutrition and making sure that more families have the adequate food supply that they need in order to be healthy and happy. And because my portfolio is national, I spend quite a bit of time traveling to visit my grantees and to connect with them and to really ensure that they are feeling supported in their work. A buzzword that has come up in recent years is this notion of trust-based philanthropy, in which you are leading with trust. And so I really try to embody that in the work that I do and really getting to know the individuals that I'm working with and ensuring that they are successful. In addition to that work, I also serve as an adjunct professor at American University in Washington, D.C. I teach in their College of Education, so it's virtual. And that work is particularly important to me as I'm able to really help educate the next generation of individuals who want to get involved in the policy space. And so lots of the students that I've had since I've been there in 2021 have been really K-12 teachers who who are pursuing their master's or doctorate and then want to go on to work within the policy space. And so that for me is given my background working in DC, working in the policy space, it's a really nice way to build that bridge, right? And to help individuals think about how do they want to maximize the work that they're doing from the classroom to a more systemic level. So something that I truly enjoy and really love giving back and connecting with students in that specific way. Lastly, I'll also say I also have my own consulting firm, so AG Consulting, and that body of work, which I co-founded the company with my advisor from my doctoral work, and him and I have really engaged in this effort in the past several years to really provide an analysis of what does Latino leadership look like at the national level. And in particular, we focused on really 2 groups recently, but both of those groups have really run kind of these large scale either internship or fellowship programs for Latino students and young professionals. And so we're trying to help those groups further understand the impact of the work that they're having and really looking at what does the future hold for Latino leadership, not only now, but in the years ahead. That consulting work, that body of work really started in my dissertation work in which I worked with my advisor, and we really launched a survey to really understand what does Latino leadership look like. So we've really built off that work, and have fortunately been able to make it into a small but mighty business.
See, and that's great, right? It sounds like you're not sleeping, but doing all the things in the world. One of the things that I connected with when I met you was the fact that you are very intentional about designing your own life and your career, and not just doing one thing, right? Because we are multi-layered individuals, and we have so many different passions and gifts and skill sets that we can put into the world, but a lot of times we don't explore them for whatever reason. So first, just want to definitely appreciate and commend that. Let's start with the consulting, right? So you're pursuing your PhD. And at the time that you started this PhD program, did you think you were going to be a full-time professor, or was the goal to always launch your consulting firm? What was your thought process there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, I got my doctorate at the University of Maryland, and I was in a cohort of 5 other students. And it's interesting because we all applied in our application saying that we wanted to be faculty. But after the first class, we all went out for dinner and we were all like, nah. Right. So it's like a little hidden secret, right? At least at where I was, that helps you kind of get in the door. But I knew right away that a full-time faculty route was not where I wanted to be. I mentioned how I really have a passion for and love teaching. It's something that I think I'll be an adjunct forever, right? It fills this part of me. And to your point about that, we're complex individuals, we're multifaceted, right? But I don't think I could do that all the time, right? I think the most that I've ever taught is kind of 2 semesters back to back, and that's because after a while, I personally get burned out and need a break and need to recharge, right? So I knew that was not in my future, and also I think, to be real, right, where the financial piece, right? Like for me, I didn't see the return on investment in terms of what for assistant professor, right? In terms of those roles, it didn't, for me, wasn't where I saw myself. And also lifestyle, right? At that point, when I was going through the information that we received was you have to go where the jobs are, right? And, I grew up on the East Coast my entire life. I'm in the Midwest now, but like there's some parts of the country I don't want to live, right? And that's real. And so that also came into play in terms of what is the life that I envision for myself. So I knew from the beginning that my path was not to teach full-time as a faculty, but I knew that why I was pursuing the degree. I think first and foremost for me, it was to be a better advocate for the communities, right? For low income, for Latino families, right? Folks like that had the same background that I did, first gen, right? Like that to me was the purpose, to be a better advocate, to be a better researcher, to write better policies, right? To evaluate policies better, right? To be in that particular role. I think secondary was to monetize the degree, right? So let's be real, right? Seeing that return, but seeing it in the way that I wanted to, right? So for being a faculty member, the main things are teaching, research, and service, right? Those are the 3 things that they often talk about. I still do those things, right? But not under the guise of a full-time faculty role. So for me, knowing that I could pursue these things separately, right? And monetize my degree in that way was the path forward. So I had that vision very, very early on to be able to know that I wanted to teach afterwards, right? So when I was going through my doctoral journey, I got teaching experience, right? And so I said, here are things that I need to do so that when I'm done, I can say I've taught graduate level, right? And I had taught before my doctoral program a bit, but I taught a lot more, right? And I got to, learn from faculty about teaching practices, right? Knowing that I wanted to do that afterwards and that I could monetize it. I got experience doing research, right? Knowing that I wanted to do this consulting firm afterwards, right? Knowing that I could bring in key people like faculty, like other students, right? So having that vision very early on, knowing how I could make the degree work for me and for those that I cared about the most in a non-traditional way, right? And not being afraid to do that, right? Not being afraid. Like I was told very early on from, in my journey where it was like, this is the way that you should do it, right? You should be a research assistant, right? Making $25,000 a year, right? And, I had been working full time for a couple of years when I applied for my doctoral degree. And again, I knew that I wasn't going to be a full-time student again. That just was not going to work. So I went to school full-time, but also had a full-time job, right? Again, that's how it worked for me. And I had that vision because financially, I just could not, right? And I wasn't going to go. And at that point in my life, after having made money, I just couldn't go back, right? But I wasn't afraid to put that vision forward. And people said, that may not work. And I said, it may not work for you, right? But I'm going to put the path forward, right? It's going to work for me, right? And so that's what I would say to those, right, who are considering, I think, not only a doctoral degree, but what does your life look like? It doesn't have to look one way, right? And as long as you have that vision, right, and work hard, right, you can craft whatever life that you want, right, in whatever way it works for you specifically.
See, and I can appreciate that, right? Like, as someone that I have usually had a full-time job, then started some consulting, then also wanted to do some podcasting, right? Like, my mind works in different pieces, right? And I try to do different things. And for me, I've been fortunate enough to be able to design my career in the way that I've always wanted. I'm wondering kind of where you first saw that approach, right? Like, did you see folks that you can look up to that had a version of this type of life, or like, where did you get this from?
Yeah. And so, I think a really transformative experience for me, I went to undergraduate. I did my undergraduate in Pennsylvania and grew up in the eastern part of Pennsylvania in Allentown. But, I then moved to Washington, D.C., where I spent close to 15 years and really the bulk of my career up to now. And I moved there through a fellowship with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, CHCI. And so during that first year, I met a mentor to this day. And I remember it was one of the first events that they had for the conference, which they have each year in September. And I remember meeting him. He's an alum from the 80s. And I remember speaking with him, and he had gotten his doctorate from Columbia, but he wasn't a professor. He had been working in philanthropy, right? At that moment in time, he had been an elected official. He had launched a consulting firm. And I was like, you don't need to follow one route. And when I met him and got to know him, he reinforced that. And he shared, you can do many things, right? Life is long, right? You don't need to get a PhD and then be a faculty member for 30 years and then retire, right? You don't have to do that. So that's kind of the first person that I met that really turned that light bulb on for me. And he said, it depends on what you want and how you craft it. A second person is my doctoral advisor. We're close, right? We're very close now and close colleagues and friends, but he is a distinguished professor in the field, a legend. And so when I first met him, very shy and very embarrassed, right? But getting to know him and working with him, I learned more of his story, in which he wasn't always a professor. Right, he had been working in research prior to that, right, within the higher ed space, and he is from a different country, right? So coming to the United States, learning his story, and so for me, that was particularly telling too, right? That you can change whatever career you have across time, right? It doesn't have to be linear, right? And life is long, right? It depends on what your passions are, right? And again, where do you see yourself, right? And how do you line up your passions with those kinds of activities, and how are you willing to work for them, right? In different ways, right? Working hard and working those long hours.
See, and that's so important, right? Like, finding people that you can take pieces of what it is they've done for their careers and their lives and applying it to however it works for you, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to replicate every piece of it, but there are aspects of it that may very well align with what you want to do and the impact that you want to have in the world. So, definitely appreciate being able to find those people. And some of them, as you said, come in different points in life, right? Some are while you're like right out of undergrad figuring things out. Some are while you're about to, become a doctoral student, right? So like they come at different places, but they all play a role. Yep. So it's just important for us to be able to find those people. Is this the type of life you would have designed in your mind when you were younger? Like, walk me through one, kind of your upbringing, where were you born, raised, that type of work. And then when you were like a teenager, did you see yourself as a professor, as someone in philanthropy, as any of that?
Good.
Talk to me.
Excellent question. So I am Dominican, family, both mom and biological dad are from DR, from Santiago, but I was born in Washington Heights. So, spent some time there as a baby, and then also some time in DR, but mostly brought up in Pennsylvania. And I mentioned that I'm a first generation student, right? So first in my family to go to college, graduate school, and I didn't. College was never really an option, right? I mean, it wasn't something that was discussed much, right? Growing up, until I had this conversation with my cousin, and for me, there's these moments in life that you look back on, and you're like, that's a moment that my life changed. And one of those was when my cousin sat me down. I was in fifth grade. Fifth grade, you're a knucklehead, right? You're out. You don't want to listen. You may not want to do your homework. And I remember he sat me down and he told me, you have an opportunity to change the trajectory of the family, right? And he meant my immediate family. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and he said, think about your sister, right? And think about how she's looking at you as a role model, and you have a real chance to do things differently and to go to college, right? And to want to be a professional. That's the first time I can remember the mention of college, right? But that wasn't a done deal, right? Middle school was a difficult time. Since I was young, I've kind of had a stutter, right, that I've dealt with. And so it started showing up quite a bit then. That led to some, mental health issues back at that time. In high school, the high school that I went to in Allentown, Pennsylvania was predominantly Latino, right? And for the folks who remember No Child Left Behind, right, that policy, we were consistently in corrective action, which meant there was always this fear of like the state coming in to take over the school, right? So schools that are not good. And so for me, using the arts during that time, using theater and choir as an outlet helped me to kind of think about and position myself as wanting to go to college, right? And even in college, right, I know I was interested in sociology, right, in social issues, right? How can we improve society as a whole, right? And so I pursued sociology. And it wasn't until I had an experience at a city hall in the town where I went to college, Williamsport, Pennsylvania, in which I started to understand the importance of policy and how policy could be a tool to change society, right, and change the outcome of different issues. That then led me to DC for my public policy fellowship. And I would be lying if I told you I saw myself as a professor, right, ever, right, or working in philanthropy. I didn't even know what philanthropy was until my time in DC, right, to be honest. And it's funny because, I often, each time I start a new semester, I kind of reflect and I think about what would I tell me at 5 years old, right? If I told them that you would be a professor, it'd be crazy. Like I didn't even know what that meant, right?
Absolutely.
And that to me was somebody else, right? That wasn't someone that looked like me or that had like my background in terms of income or my stutter or was Dominican, right? So I think over time, it's really the people that I've met that allowed me to see myself in these roles and that given me the confidence to pursue those roles, right? Whether it is getting involved in high school and seeing people, years ahead of me that were doing these things, whether it's getting involved in college or CHCI or all these other roles, right? How I saw myself as a doctoral student was another doctoral student, right? Who told me I had that potential, right? And said they saw me as someone who could get a PhD, right? Who was committed, right? Who would be able to achieve those things. That was something that was out of the realm of possibility. And so I think, a common notion, right? I think, or a phrase is, if you see it, then you believe it, right? And if people see it in you, right, it helps reinforce those things, right? And the things that we don't see within ourselves that others see helps reinforce that. That's been at several stages of my life, critical junctures. I've had those people. Without, I wouldn't be here, right? That have seen something in me that has allowed me to push forward.
No, you're absolutely right, right? Like it takes both us seeing people that are doing the work and having people see something in us that just sparks us at different points, right? So you'll have people that, like, I was actually just speaking about this recently, like my fourth grade teacher gave me so much confidence, right? Just by telling me that I was really good at forming arguments in like a way that was positive, right? Like she's like, wow, you could really like tell a story and argument and like argue about anything in a positive, like you could be a lawyer or something, right? And I'm like, right, but I'm like 9, and I at that time that was my first class in English, right? Like I was a Dominican immigrant, so that was my first time in an English class, and this person's telling me not only do I speak the language well, I'm able to formulate real articulate thoughts, and you should consider being a lawyer. And I was like, what? That's a thing that I could do, right? But like, there's so much value in that, and people seeing so much greatness in us before we're able to see it. So, I think this is now the second time that you mentioned CHCI. So would love for you to both articulate kind of what is CHCI and at what point can people get involved in it, right? And the way that you were involved. And then 2, you're also really good at finding professional development continuously and different fellowships and things that continue to expand your network and presence in the field. So we'd love for you to talk about both CHCI, but then also just generally, why do you do these fellowships? What are you getting out of them? And highlight any that you think are appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I think fellowships, I think are I see them as critical. I don't think that your development as a leader ends after your degree or after a program, right? I'm continuously trying to learn and push myself to learn on different topics, different issues. And that to me is the importance of fellowships, right? 1, to continue to learn and to push your thinking in different ways. But 2, you're continuing to build a community in different ways, right? You're continuing to build your network through these experiences, right? Some of the best relationships, right, are built across time, right? So you have a joint experience, whether that is a week or several months together, and then that then carries on across time, and you're able to collaborate with individuals in different ways. So to me, the time invested there is invaluable, right? I've been able to call on my fellows for personal reasons, for professional, right? And in many different ways, right? So you're building your network and meeting people in different ways, right? There's a lot of research that talks about as we get older and as we age, it's harder to meet people. It's harder to make friends, right? Because we become isolated, right? Once we leave these spaces, right? In particular, school. So fellowships are a way to continue meeting people, to continue your development in different ways. So I'm a strong proponent. I think for me, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, CHCI, life-changing, transformative, right? I went to a predominantly white undergraduate institution, small private liberal arts, Lycoming College. It was a great education. But up to that time, I hadn't seen other Latinos who were pursuing their degrees, right? Or who were focused on leadership or involved in student senate or doing all these different things. Much less Latinos who were older than me who had done those things, right? Who had gotten degrees in different ways, right? That just wasn't prevalent and close to me where I was. CHCI changed that, right? It is a program that brings high school students or undergraduate students, or in my case, college grads to DC to learn about policy, right? How does policy work? How does it not work, right? And how do things get done or not get done in Washington D.C., right? The epicenter of politics. And so for me, I didn't major in political science, right? I mentioned I majored in sociology, but I got to learn about how policy gets done and what are the inner workings of political science, right? And so that for me was on the learning component, right? Which I mentioned before. I learned all about that. But I also developed these lifelong friendships to this very day, right? People that I'm closest to, right, in my life came from that experience, whether when I was a fellow or was when I was on the alumni board, right? Those experiences, that network that has really transformed me and supported me in so many different ways through CHCI. So that I think for any Latino students, right, who might be listening to this, who are in college right now, that would be one that I would recommend highly, highly, right? You can come to DC. You spend 9 months, right, from August till May, working on the Hill or a government agency. You get seminars on what it means to be a Latino leader, and you get to learn, right? And you get to explore all these different things. Additionally, through my experience with CHCI, I learned about other fellowships, right? For professionals, I think it's between 30 and 45. The U.S. Spain Council is a week-long experience in which professionals go to Spain, right, and learn about the intricacies of policy within Spain, right? Who are the key players? What are the key sectors? So you're talking philanthropy, government, business, right? Those experiences strengthen your understanding, right? So while there are domestic fellowships like CHCI, which give you that understanding of what's going on, there's also these international fellowships that provide you an opportunity to go out and learn about work in other countries, right? What's happening and what does that mean for the United States? Like, other countries do this differently, huh? Wow. So now I can compare. Now I know about the United States. Now I can compare what happens nationally or internationally with different countries. I think the last one that I will lift up that Radhy, you also know, Hispanics in philanthropy, right? That is a great opportunity for folks who are even curious about philanthropy, want to know about philanthropy. It is a great way to make connections. So I did their fellowship back many years ago before I was even in philanthropy. But I just wanted to know, what is this all about? Like, what is philanthropy? Like, really? Right? So that, I think, is a great way for folks who are either working in the philanthropic space or are interested, right? Again, expanding your horizons, learning, making connections. That's what it's all about. That's how we continue to improve as individuals, but that's how really we continue to improve as a community. If you're moving forward, then you're helping to lift up others too.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Fellowships absolutely matter. It is really important for us to continue to professionally develop, to build our network, to understand how our industries are moving and growing, and share best practices and worst practices, both nationally and internationally, right? Like you mentioned, the Líderes cohort for Hispanics in philanthropy, like that was a really transformative experience, and that now I'm able to meet other people in philanthropy that look like me, right? So like that to me was very valuable, especially when it was at a time when I was newer to philanthropy, and meet others that are also on the ground doing the work, right? So it's just a good kind of mix of folks they bring together. I've also done like the International Career Advancement Program, ICAP. It's a really great cohort of people that are really in looking at ways to better different communities throughout the world. Basically, we look at things in terms of what is now, some bad words when you think about, diversity, equity, inclusion, but like people that are really thinking about how to make communities better for all. That program specifically has, a good number of federal government folks, some people in philanthropy and others. You get to spend some time in Aspen, Colorado, and you get to make friends that are going to last forever, right? So, it's a great opportunity, and colleagues are like, you can now look out for each other and support each other. So yeah, definitely echo everything you just said about fellowships and their importance. I think would love to hear a little bit about, you mentioned, going for your doctoral degree. You mentioned some of your work in your undergrad. Wondering at what point did you decide to go get a master's? And subsequently, at what point did you figure, you know what, a PhD is going to be the route?
Yep. That's a great question. So, I had applied for my master's degree when I was in undergrad. So I applied to CHCI. I applied for my master's at several universities. And then I also applied for TFA, right? So I had gotten into all of these different routes, right? So I was tremendously blessed. When I was deciding between the degree and CHCI, I had a fully funded degree opportunity for my master's. And I remember my mom being like, it's free, right? With this piece around finances, right? And as a first generation student, right? Or I went to my undergrad largely because of the quality of the education, but the financial package that they provided. And for many Latinos, it's like, wait, free, or like it's like go where it's makes the most sense financially, right? And so that was a tough choice, right? To kind of turn down that degree that was for free and pursue that route in CHCI. It took some time for my mom and family to understand, but I knew that was the longer term investment, that I knew that it would change my life in ways I couldn't quantify, and it did. And so I knew that I was going to pursue a master's when I started the fellowship. Like, that was clear. And I actually deferred admission for my master's program to do the fellowship. And then after being in the fellowship, I said I wasn't going to go there, that I was going to stay and work an extra year, which was great. So I took 2 years in between my bachelor's and master's. And at that time, I had been exposed to all these different issues, right? College access was something near and dear to my heart. And so I did, while doing my fellowship and some other work at different nonprofits in the DC area, learned about the importance of college access, and I was like, here's where I want to focus. And then, so I started the application process. I had many options, right? And I got into several programs. I got into some Ivy League programs, and then I got into the University of Maryland College Park, which at that point was top 10. And my advisor and now dear friend was a giant, right? And so he was someone where I just wanted to work with in many different ways. But I think a lesson here is I'd gotten into the Ivy League institutions, and there was a certain price for each of them, right? Maryland at the time was tuition free, right? They were giving assistantships where you worked on campus, got that experience, and then that paid your tuition. And I felt like their program was a bit more rigorous. But ultimately, I came down to the choice of, do I pursue this Ivy League opportunity? And I think as a Latino first gen, you're like, oh, if I can get an Ivy League degree, that's a game changer, right? But what does that mean for my debt, right? What does that mean for the future, for my ability to do things like buy a house, right? Or buy cars or do these different things versus going to Maryland, right? Which I thought was more rigorous. So that to me was I talked about these moments, right? That you remember and that you're like, which way do I go? How is this going to change? That was a moment in time, right? I stayed in the DC area, right? I went to the University of Maryland College Park, a great degree, great education, got to get close to who is now a dear colleague and friend, right? Got to build a community right there. And when I was pursuing my doctorate, right, my doctoral degree, I believe it was easier to be accepted at Maryland because I was a master's student, right? And the faculty remembered me. And that facilitated me being able to work full time, right? And go part time. I feel that if I was not known for my master's degree, I don't think that would have been the case, right? I don't know if I would have been accepted there. I don't know if when accepted, they would have allowed me to work full time, right? And so I think it was very intentional, right? And, I think people ask me, when I tell them this part of my journey, do you regret not going to these Ivy League institutions? And I say, no, right? I think you get to where you're going to be. Case in point, I mentioned my cohort of doctoral students that we went in together. A couple of them were at the Ivy League institutions, right? As master students that I mentioned before. And we all ended up in the same doctoral program, right? So that to me was even more validation of me making the right journey and me making that right choice about getting to where I needed to be and what the future held in that particular way.
I think that's, right on point. Like we have these decision moments, and for you to weigh out, like, what does it mean for me to go to an Ivy League institution as a first gen student, right? Does that outweigh what you mentioned earlier in the episode about thinking about changing the lineage of your family and the finances of your family, right? Like, do you want to do that while being in more debt, or would this degree put you in a better position to actually accelerate that goal? So it's just remarkable that you were able to like make that decision in that moment, because that can be a really tough one to overcome. So, and as you said, it led you to a program with people from all backgrounds that came from Ivy League institutions, that came from different spaces, but you ultimately end up with a very similar, robust education. So that's great. You wear many different hats, right? But part of the show here is trying to have some salary transparency and what people can actually expect to make in different fields at different points in their careers. Would love to hear kind of what would that look like? And I know for you, there's a multi-layered answer because you don't have one source of income, but like, what could that look like?
Yeah, I think it varies, right? So first I'll talk about within the philanthropy space. There's many different, I think, versions of philanthropy setup, right? You have like a small family foundation, you have corporate, you have, different regional foundations, you have large scale, right? All of those have different bands and different structures. And so, I think when typically the smaller and more localized ones have a lower salary band, right? So we're talking, I think, 100,000 and less, right? I think is where those are at. The bigger ones, right? Or the more prestigious family foundations, you're talking kind of a higher salary range. So like between 150 and 2, right? So depending on where you are and your seniority in that field. So that's, I think, something to consider when folks are looking at it. I think for me, for the longest time, again, first gen, low income, it was like, if I can just make six figures, then I am good. Right. And then like when you get there, you're like, okay, if I can just make that, whatever it is, the next level. Right. So you're always driving for more. Right. And so I think, so I think philanthropy for folks who are interested in kind of higher, right, salaries, I think it's great. I think if we compare to like policy from right the space in DC that I was, I think there is a change, right, and it allows for kind of more compensation. I think in that regard. I mentioned I love teaching. I love being an adjunct professor. Well, I would not do that as my full time, right? And folks who are serving in adjuncts in different places, that's a tough gig. Adjuncts typically get paid by class, right? So it's not typically hourly. It's by, here's the lump sum for the class for the semester, right? So you're talking about preparing for class, you're talking about teaching, you're talking about grading, you're talking about meeting with students, right? Sometimes you're talking about engaging in faculty conversations around certain issues, right? So that I think is a different structure, right? I've taught at a number of different institutions, and I think the range I've seen has been like a couple thousand, like 3,000-4,000 up to like 12,000, right, per class, right? So again, if you're thinking about that being your full-time gig and you're teaching across a number of institutions, that could be difficult, right? Because you're not sure of like how much when you add that all together. Now, if you have a full-time job and you're doing this as like a passion, but also additional income, not bad, right? Like if you're not solely living off that, if you're perhaps saving that or putting it towards something, right? It's a nice additional chunk of change, right? But even then, you really got to love doing it, right? Because if you sit down and do the math for the hours, you're like, wait a minute, that's tough. The consultant is a little different, right? And I think for folks, there's a couple of routes, right? I think there's folks, like myself who do it on the side and have all these different pieces, right? And there's folks who do it as the full time, right? And the difference is you can set different kinds of rates, right, that are hourly, right, for your time, right? You can really hone in and professionalize the aspects of what that looks like. And depending on what that rate is, I've seen, $100 to $200 an hour, right, depending on what the work is that you're doing. So that, I think, if you sit and kind of add those things up, right, you could make a good chunk of change. In those cases, you'll have to think about things like healthcare, things like retirement, right? Since there's no employer, you have to think like taxes, right? What does that mean? Calculating all of that's now on you versus the employer, right? So that, I think, and there's a financial component that comes along with that. The thing I like about it, having a full-time, doing it on the side, I'm able to, that's additional income that I'm bringing in, right? That I'm able to not solely rely on, right? But to use in different ways. And so that, I think, is great. And the way that I've done it is it's typically per project, right? So I'll kind of lay out the scope and say, here's what's going to be done, and then attach a dollar amount to that. I think if I would expand that, I would make it hourly, right? Because that's the next step. I haven't done that, right? And I think for both the teaching and the consulting, right, that would be kind of where you take it to the next level. But because I have, my 9 to 5, I haven't had the need to do that. But if I would, that's how I would do things a bit differently. One thing I'll say here as well, that my mentor told me back when I was in the fellowship, it said, you need to have multiple streams of income. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you need to be able to make money in many different ways, and you need to monetize aspects of your skills. And that, I think, is how I've applied this, right? I mentioned teaching, research, and service. The teaching, monetize. The research is monetized, right? The service I love to do, right? And giving back by serving on boards and, having conversations. But I found that the way to have multiple streams, right? I think none of those I would want to stand alone. I'd want them combined, but it's still, I'm being able to be monetized for aspects of my work and aspects of my skills that I think about. Yes, like this is how I saw, and this is how I'm living that, right? And when I talk to folks, I say you got to have multiple streams of income, right? And you got to figure out within your bandwidth, within your skills, how do you monetize different aspects of that in order to build that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, man. That's how I've approached life. Different pillars, different things, different interests. You find ways to sometimes connect them. Sometimes they're just completely different, and that's fine too. But I love the phrase monetize your skill sets in different ways. That's great. Are there any forms of media, this could be books, podcasts, subscriptions, anything that have shaped you personally or professionally that the world should check out?
Yeah, I think I'll offer a couple things more on the personal side, right? We've been talking a lot about the professional, but like, unless your personal, you're at Zen, it's hard. It's hard to want to
That's right.
monetize. It's hard to grind on these different ways, right? So I'll mention a couple of things. One, I've gotten into meditation, so I think the Calm app, right? Calm, that's what I use in particular. Is a great way to start the day off. I'm a morning person, so it's a great way for me to start the day centered, right? And to be able to go through the day and through breathing exercises and to feel solid and sound, right? I mean, without that, it's hard to show up and do everything else that you need to do. In addition to that, I think in multiple spaces I've been in, right? I mentioned a predominantly white institution, my fellowship in CHCI, right? Graduate school, right? I think you feel like imposter syndrome, right? And you're like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here, right? Is it me? There is a number of podcasts that focus on to break down imposter syndrome, right? And what does that look like? And how are you supporting yourself? And how are you showing up in different ways, right? So I've listened to several, but really any podcast that focuses on imposter syndrome, I would kind of go to for folks to kind of listen to, especially as you're navigating these different spaces and you're trying to move forward and live your life in a positive way.
That's
Two
right.
more things that I would offer. I recently read a book. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy, right? I think for me on the personal side, right, I consider myself a nice person, welcoming, friendly, but I think across time, I think certainly in the professional, I've had to sharpen my elbows, right? So what does that mean? Right? When you're advancing in your career and you're trying to carve out and visualize and design the life that you want, sometimes you got to have those difficult conversations, right? So what does that mean? What does that look like? And then I think lastly, and this is kind of more of a recent trend, when you have those conversations and people don't get it, you got to let them, right? So I think Mel Robbins, right, talks a lot about this. And so Mel Robbins and the Let Them Theory, right? She's written a book. She's done a podcast. Really tremendous resource to help for you to stay grounded. And if folks are not where you are, you got to keep moving forward, right? Like you got to let them be who they're going to be, and you got to keep being you. One more thing, sorry, that just came to mind. Another podcast that I really, really enjoy is Pivot, right? And it's by a couple of former NFL players, right? That basically bring somebody on each week and talk about a point in their life when they had to pivot and make a change. And we all have to do that again and again and again. And what they learned from that change, right? Because as much as I have seen my life in these different ways, a lot of things have come my way that I didn't expect, right? And now what do you do when you need to change and you have to pivot? And what do you learn from that, right? That I think is something that we could all use as we pursue this journey and want to design this life that we want to design and want to be the person that we want to be, I think both professionally, but also personally.
That's great. No More Mr. Nice Guy. That was a great book. I read that actually. Actually, it was recommended to me a while ago, and it was a really informative, transformative book for the personality that I inherently have. But just to be mindful about what does that mean, how does that come across, how to use that to your advantage, and how to just be mindful of some of the. So that's great. Thank you for that. Just across the spectrum of all the things you do, would love to just hear kind of what are you most proud of in terms of the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having.
Yeah, so I think for me, I mentioned the importance of people I've had in my life, and when I see people that I've been able to have a conversation with, a conversation like the one that we've had today, and just share parts of my journey, and that they're then able to then go on, right, and do amazing and incredible things. That I think is what I'm most proud of, right? That from being people in my family to interns and fellows that have done CHCI to people through graduate school. That to me is the most impactful thing, because to me it's what it's all about, right? Going back to why I wanted to pursue the work I've done and my degree, it's like about the people and the issues that I care about, right? And making sure that they are uplifted and successful, right? So at the end of the day, the fellowships and the accomplishments are cool, I guess, right? But it's not really about that. It's about the people and how you're building a community and lifting up others, right? So that to me is the most important thing, and I think what I'm most proud of. And again, that's when students graduate and get their degree, and right, or when
Yeah.
people get that job or get that fellowship, and you're like, I'm proud of you, right? That to me is the most important thing, and that's the true it's the true impact of the work that you're doing, and the legacy that one has.
That's awesome. Is there anything else we haven't discussed that the world should know about Dr. Guzman?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this, but I think really being able to sit down and visualize, I think personally and professionally, where you see yourself, right? And not letting other people tell you this is who you're going to be, right? Or this is how you're going to do it. I gave the example of my doctorate where it's like, traditionally, here's how it's done. And I was like, well, that's cool, but I'm not going to do it that way. And I'm still going to finish, right? So having that drive, that confidence, right? That the way that you're doing it is the way that works for you. It may not work for them, but it works for you, right? That is something that I would impart on those who listen to this. And and really take the leap, right? I think I mentioned imposter syndrome, and sometimes that holds us back. But I mean, why not you, right? Why not you for that job? Why not you for a professor? Why not you for consulting, right? That I think is, and if you need someone to back you up, you let me know and we can sit down and chat about it. But why not you?
I love that. That's what Career Cheat Code is about. Doing the thing. Why not you? Let's get to it, people.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and believe on the mission we're on, please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're using, and share this podcast with your friends and your networks. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Career Cheat Code, and tell us people or careers you would like to see highlighted. See you next week with some more cheat codes. Peace.